You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm here today with Amanda Malko, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at G2. Amanda, not everyone knows what G2 is. I know what G2 is from the early days of G2, but it's such an influential location for marketers and tech folks who are trying to decide between different vendors or between different technology stacks or platforms. So why don't you give us the elevator pitch for it?
Yeah, sure. So G2 is a software marketplace and review site, and we reach 60 million software buyers every year who are looking to discover, research, compare, and buy everything from accounting software to CRM software. So we have over 100,000 different products on the site across 2,000 categories.
Right. I had noticed that you guys had really broadened out the categories and the products. It's just amazing the level of breadth and depth that you guys have added into the site. But I'd imagine there's probably an 80-20 rule or some really popular categories. Which are the ones that really drive most of the traffic?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll give you kind of two insights. One is the most popular in terms of traffic. So marketing software is definitely one of our most popular categories. As you alluded to, IT infrastructure is definitely up there in the top three as well. Probably no surprise. And then ERP and HR software are some other really popular categories as well. I think one of the things that's really interesting about G2, and certainly that attracted me to joining the company, is how much data the company has on what's happening in technology and in software. And how that can help us understand everything from what software we should be using, but also sort of like what's trending and where is the world going. And so we actually just released a report that included some insights on some of the biggest increases in category traffic year over year. The top one was actually cryptocurrency mining, which is telling me that we're all sitting at home during COVID and trying to figure out, in addition to our business lives, like how can I make a buck with this cryptocurrency thing? And then, things like virtual event platform software and even productivity software. And I think that really just sort of points to people trying to navigate this new world of working remotely. And how do we actually navigate that to connect with each other and with our customers? So I love to say that there is those top categories, but then it's also G2 is a great place that kind of reflects the zeitgeist of culture too through software.
Right. Well, you guys roped me into being one of your data points, right? Where I've actually done reviews on some things, and every once in a while I'll get a little reminder to come and share my views on G2.
Well, thanks for doing that. We really appreciate it. I mean, reviews are sort of the currency of G2.
Right. But, you guys aren't alone in the marketplace. There are some niche sites that are specific to reviewing very niche-y categories. And then there are others that are sort of also trying to be broad. So as you're marketing yourselves to the sort of, advertisers and platform providers that sort of generate a lot of your revenue, how do you differentiate yourselves other than just sheer scale? How do you differentiate yourselves from the competition?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things. I think one is certainly building a brand that is both known and trusted. And so I think trust is pretty critical to any marketplace, but certainly one that is based on user reviews. It's absolutely critical. So we spend a lot of time, money, and effort within our teams to make sure that we're upholding that trust by accepting only moderated, verified reviews. And so I think that's a key part of our differentiation, is the way that we ensure both quality, but also trusted and verified reviews on the platform. And then making sure that people feel like they can get both breadth and depth across the site, so that if you're, like you said, you reviewed in a couple of categories. So making sure that whether you're looking for CRM software, maybe you're running a business, now I need to look for accounting software, we're providing you with that same consistency and experience and trust across all of the categories that you might need software in.
Right, right. I noticed next to you in your background, you've got the badges, some of the badges that are there. Yeah. And
Zoom trick.
yeah, exactly. Some of those badges, and obviously a lot of the folks who happen to do well in the reviews are probably motivated to use those. And to some extent, that creates a win for you because now they're also becoming a marketing channel for you while also being, part of the ecosystem. So yeah, I'd love to hear sort of the strategy about how you deploy those, and how you work with the people who do well. And then what about the people who are in the middle? Like, are they left out or is there somewhere for them in the ecosystem as well?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is there is a place for everybody. And, the way G2 was formed, you might appreciate this because if you've ever been part of a Forrester Wave or a Gartner Magic Quadrant, it's hard to get into those. You can spend years and years. I know I've been through this journey where you're sort of just trying to meet the criteria to even have them take a look at your software to maybe get on the quadrant, right? And maybe be considered for a wave. And so I think the nice thing about G2 is there is a place for everybody. And so one of our the people we have a small business, mid-market, enterprise, and in all types and sizes of companies, you can be a leader. We have companies that started out and out of nowhere, they're a leader in a category because they are really seeing great success with their customers. It has nothing to do with how big they are, how much revenue they have. It's simply about how much success do their customers see with the platform and how well do they evangelize that. So I really think there's a place for everyone. And for the people who are maybe not in the leadership position on the grid yet, that's a great opportunity to say, is there something we could be doing better? How do we listen to our customers and improve upon our product? Or maybe it's just that they're not championing or advocating for us enough. And how do we make sure we're leaning into that? Because beyond just being a great presence on G2 when you have great favorable reviews, there is usually a lot of other great residual benefits of ensuring you're listening to your customers and their feedback.
Absolutely. It may not be something you're privy to, but I notice there's like a lot of situations where a particular provider or platform provider sort of maybe bridges categories, right? And it's sort of hard to decide where they belong. Now, is there an editorial team that sort of has to sort of be the referee there and sort of decide, okay, it's a CRM platform? The vendor's like, no, we're not CRM. They're like, well, yeah, you sort of are.
Yes. And that's another thing. It's like, how long does it take to create a category that's recognized? So when you think about how many categories, we have 2,000 categories. So if you think about like a Gartner or Forrester, they're kind of really focusing on just the biggest ones. And so what you're not catching in that is like, how are things changing? And we actually revisit our categories on an ongoing basis. We'll actually hear anyone pretty much anytime through our analysts. All you have to do is claim your profile and say, I want to talk about my category. And our analysts will talk about the category. And then we have a methodology for how we create the categories it's pretty built around like how much are we hearing this across the market? How many people would fit within the category? So a lot of times we hear people like, I want to create this category. And it's like, well, a category exists when there's enough volume to necessitate. And for us, that's about 10. So if you've got enough competitors that we can really say, okay, we can create a report around this. There's clear differentiation. There's enough market demand. And it's distinct from the thing that perhaps came before it or that you're separate, kind of carving yourself out from. That gives us enough kind of confidence in that. And so that's the real focus for our analysts beyond just, curating the categories and making sure they're listening and reflecting that back in the reports around user reviews, but also being an advocate for category creation more so than saying like, call us in 2 years when everybody's caught up and we'll maybe publish a report. It's really, how do we champion that? Because technology changes quickly and we know that.
Have you ever removed a category where you were like, oh, this is a category that existed back then, but now it's not relevant anymore?
That's a good question. I imagine we have, but I haven't gotten asked that specific question to know the numbers behind it. I do know that, like, for example, in Q2 of this year, we created 8 new categories just to give you a sense of the volume. I don't have the Q3 number offhand, but that was for Q2. And so we do create a fair number of categories. I think where that happens is consolidations. There is consolidation, right? Sometimes you see that consolidation of technologies. We see this in marketing actually quite often, where you might have point solutions and then eventually you migrate and sort of the category becomes more of an all-in-one or consolidated play. So I do think we see a fair amount of that, where you get consolidation of what used to be point solutions into some of these broader, more macro categories.
Right. I usually think of G2 as folks who already know the category that they need, right? And so they're like a lower funnel shopper, for lack of a better term. And they're really just trying to decide, okay, which platforms or technology or brands are in my consideration set. But when I sort of start to look at your site more closely, I get the sense that, well, maybe not everybody even knows the category that they're interested in, or maybe they know one vendor in a category and then they discover the category as a result of having done a Google search for that one vendor. And then they're like, oh, I get that. That's what that category is called. Like, okay, I get it. And then you guys sort of really have an editorial role in that discovery process. So do you get a sense of sort of how many of the people who are visiting are sort of really lower funnel, and how many of them are sort of really in their earlier stages of research, really to sort of try to define the category and define their needs and really flesh things out for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's interestingly, we did do some research on this shortly after I came in. We ran a study, and it tends to be sort of 2 core parts of the journey, and it's pretty much what you just described. So the first would be, I know I need this software, and so a lot of times that's going to come in through CRM is maybe not the best example, but it might be something like, hey, I've heard about these virtual event platforms. I know I need one. I need to understand like what I should even be thinking about. So like if I'm not using Zoom, what's the criteria? And I'm going to do a search on like virtual event platforms. And you might come into G2 because we've actually got all kinds of content on our site about virtual event platforms as an example, and how you can think about that. So you might come in through an article or a research report or the category page itself and discover things about the category, what you should be thinking about, what's right for what types of businesses, and then of course all of the companies that you might consider. The other time, so somewhere where I know I need some software, not really sure what I need, let me learn a little bit more about it, is one point. And so I would consider that maybe more upper mid funnel. And then there's a lot of people who are like, I do have a company in mind and I'm going to come in that way, but I really need to understand how they compare against others in their category. And really, I just want to make sure, maybe I feel pretty good about it, but I want to make sure I hear from others and others that I trust. And so then there is that high intent buyer is a good portion of the site as well. And one of the nice things about G2 is, back to the differentiation question, you can filter by segment. So if I'm an enterprise buyer, I really just want to hear from other enterprise users. I don't really care if the small business used it successfully, because they probably don't have the same challenges and needs that I do. And you can even do it by region, because you might have a really good customer success presence in, say, the UK, but if you're an American buyer, maybe you want to make sure that you're hearing the voice of the customers that are like you in the region. So those are just some examples of the types of ways people come into the site. And so that's a long way of saying, yes, you were spot on with that in a little more detail.
Thanks. One of the things I was thinking about is some of the categories that you guys cover effectively also have sort of one or two major sort of either analysts or influencers or gurus in that category, right? So do you hear from users that those gurus that are supposedly like deep in that category also really play a role in their decision process?
Yes, and I would say that, as marketers, I think it's nice when we can say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. This is the more important thing now. And the reality is, like, it's all still, important. And so analysts do still play a role. And so what we found in our research is that People do, especially at enterprise companies, do still look to analysts in particular, but only 4% of the buyers, we surveyed about 800 buyers, only 4% say I really trust them the most. It was sort of like, yes, and 86% of them say, including, by the way, 85% of enterprise companies say, I also look at reviews.
Right.
So it's sort of a yes, and I think it does depend. I think there are more established categories tend to have more vocal champions and influencers in them than some of the newer categories. So I also think it depends on what kind of software that you're looking for. And are you one of those buyers who's like, I need to be on the latest and greatest, or you're like, I'm gonna kind of follow what other people have sort of pioneered before me? And it kind of depends on what kind of buyer you are, how much you value that.
Right. Well, having come from SEO, where I started in SEO, I guess technically in like 95, there's always been this sort of mentality within the SEO industry that you're sort of trying to some extent game the algorithm or game the system. And your platform is essentially sort of a wisdom of crowds kind of thing, where you're getting the data from the people who are out there actually using the platforms, et cetera. But I guess that leaves you open to the same kind of gaming, right? Where companies will be like, oh, I'm sure we can move the needle on our G2 if we do this, this, and this. And is that an issue for you? And how do you battle it?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and it was one of the first ones I actually asked when I started at G2. Is like, how big of an issue is this? And I think you'd be surprised. It's actually not as prevalent as you might expect. And so I actually asked, like, how many times has this happened? And I think in the last 5 years, you can count on one hand how many times we've really encountered a company very intentionally trying to game their reviews. I will say, that doesn't mean that there aren't fraudulent reviews. Those can happen for all kinds of reasons, right? And it could be that it's a one-off, or even that it's not fraudulent, it's just not quality. Like, it's hard to know if the person is trusted, or there might be other reasons. Say someone runs some promotions and they're like, oh, well, if I just put in 5 reviews under different names. So, oftentimes users, we're not always the best reviewers. And so we actually reject about 25% of our reviews. And that's pretty consistent. We have a number of people who have worked at other types of review companies, including in B2C, and that's pretty consistent with industry average. And so it's interesting to know that, our reviews are often, actually, I wrote a review and I guess it didn't meet the quality long time ago for G2, and it didn't. A company that I really liked said, will you review us? And I did. And then I looked 2 weeks later and I was like, hey, it's not on there. And they're like, they actually rejected your review. It wasn't detailed enough. Right. And I was like, I love that. Right. I was like, oh, I really wanted my review to make it up there. But it just goes to show that, like, I think less so fraud and more about, like, let's make sure that the reviews that they get through, we really can validate, is something that we really look at.
Great. I see you guys as an SEO success story, really. Like, obviously SEO has been a big foundation of your traffic from the very beginning, but I think you've continued to sort of excel at SEO, and it drives the bulk of your traffic, at least as far as I can tell. So for those marketers who are sort of struggling with whether or not to invest in SEO, right, which usually gets underinvested, what's your advice to them about SEO, and how soon can they expect to see returns? Obviously, it could be anywhere all over the map, depending on how far behind they are. But I think people really do struggle with SEO as a form of earned media, right? And you never know what you're going to get when you go out and try to do any form of earned media.
Well, it's so true. And I was going to say that. I was like, the nice thing about SEO compared to, say, PR, which is also measurable, but maybe not as much so, is that SEO, certainly like PR, is something that we will build upon over time. So you will see, and this, but you'll see gains that kind of compound on each other. Yeah. And with PR, though, sometimes you're like, well, in a year, 6 to 12 months, I'll be able to kind of say, like, how is it starting to compound? With SEO, you really can see it on a, even day-to-day basis. How am I compounding my success. So I would say the first thing is to get started. And if you're not even sure you should get started, I would say Google yourself, and then you'll probably be pretty sure you should get started and consider that that's the gateway to your brand. And then, I think the other thing is remembering that SEO has so many residual benefits beyond the search engine. And I think sometimes we forget that. Like, SEO is about discoverability, and discoverability means including on other sites that might leverage the credibility you're building up, that might discover you and reference you. And I think when you can kind of think about SEO is how do we ensure we're discovered, it really is such an important strategy for any brand.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because our SEO strategy for clients over the years has really extended into digital PR and controlling as much of the SERP as possible, search engine results page, as possible. And it's really not just about getting yourself to rank. It's about controlling as much of that real estate as possible with things that are positive about you. And people sort of say, well, is that reputation management? I'm like, well, it's beyond that. It's really like there are lots of other places where positive editorial about you can yield benefit. And it's sort of not even purely always SEO. So syndicated content planning ends up being a really important part of what we end up recommending for a lot of folks. When the companies are trying to sort of make G2 part of their presence, their web presence, and your teams are helping them do that, what can other brands learn from that perhaps don't have a G2? Like, how can they apply some of what the companies you deal with are doing on G2 and maybe apply it to other categories?
Yeah. So in this case, like a non-software company, how they could, apply it. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is, how can you think about your customer as a channel, as an advocate and a marketing channel for you in a way? I think one of the things that reviews provide, whether you're B2C or B2B, is just a really tangible element of customer proof and validation. And it's just such a great tactic to get a customer to share their story about your brand and advocate on your behalf. But it's just one tactic, right? So as a brand marketer, just a marketer in general, I think we under leverage our customers as a channel and as marketing partners for and with us. And so if you can think about, how do I kind of co-market with my customers? How do I think about them as evangelists for my brand? We have influencer marketing, and I'm not talking about that. I mean, truly like your everyday customer. Reviews is one great way to do that. But I think when you start to unravel that, there's a lot of ways that every person who buys your product could help bring in another person who buys your product, and do it probably more efficiently sometimes than the amount we spend on paid media. So it's just an interesting maybe thought exercise of what would it look like to make your customers a marketing partner.
Yeah, and when you said it that way, it made me think about every customer that's got a Twitter account or a Facebook account or an Instagram. That's their little mini publishing venue, right? And if they use it against you, you're in trouble. And if they use it for you, that's great, right? So you want to try to make sure they use it for you.
Yeah. And I mean, we often talk about like word of mouth is like, the most efficient and still the greatest, marketing channel there is. Whether that happens online or off, how can you encourage and inspire that advocacy? I think that's still one of the fundamentals of marketing.
Absolutely. Given your B2B focus, one interesting thing, when I looked at your stats, is that you're still heavier sort of desktop user than a lot of other sites are that have really moved over to sort of much heavier mobile. But I would imagine that still there's this creeping sort of mobile user that keeps incrementing up over time. And have you had to really rethink the user experience to make it sort of more mobile centric?
I loved this question. And you sent me some of those stats, and we do know, about 75% of our traffic, as you said, it comes through desktop, which is different than many sites, and certainly the direction that many sites are headed. And actually our desktop traffic is growing much faster. And I think that the key difference is the use case in which G2 is utilized. So, I think we're really looking for qualified software buyers to be on our site. And so when we think about quality traffic, it's those mid and later stage high intent customers looking for software. And so, in general, when you're doing exploration around software, a lot of times that software is desktop software. And so the best, or at least software you're going to use on your computer, you're not necessarily accessing it all the time on your phone. And so I think true intent would be that software buyers are probably wanting to see that on that same environment. They're looking at screenshots, they're looking at the product demos. And so we think that that's probably not going to change as much as be an indication of the intention of the people on our site and what they're really trying to do.
Absolutely. And obviously you wear the marketing hat for most of your day. And so you have to think about your own marketing and your own channels as well. So are there any things, coming down the pike that you're particularly excited about as a way to reach, new customers for the site? I guess you have sort of two, I'm imagining you have sort of two missions. One is to get more of the companies which will end up sort of paying the bills, but then you've also got the consumers who are going to come in and help, consume the content. So, what's got you excited about the next year?
Yeah, so I'm excited about a couple of different things. I mean, we have a fantastic marketing team, and I've only been at G2 7 months now, but I would say looking ahead, I think the things that get me really excited are, one, building the brand so that we do become more well known as, almost like if you think of Google's for search and Yelp is for restaurants and G2 is for software. And we really want to make our brand more widely known across the world. We actually have quite a good chunk of traffic that comes out of EMEA and APAC, but we're looking to grow even more internationally. So I'm excited about that. And then I would say, I think the other thing is on the software companies who partner with us on that side, I'm excited to really lean into helping champion great software and how our solutions can help software marketers. And so we're making some investments in building out our marketing community and making sure that we're helping train and educate software marketers and how they can really lean into customer voice and leverage a lot of the data that we have on G2 to help them build their companies and their brands, whether they're just starting out or a more experienced enterprise, as many of our customers, like, the Adobes and Autodesks and Salesforce of the world are.
So how far do you think the G2 brand is extensible, right? So obviously software, even defining software, is becoming a little bit more difficult with the fuzzy edges around, is this a platform and therefore is it software, and therefore do we need a category for it? So you won't get to the restaurants as being software, but certainly, you talked about Yelp being sort of the place for a hyperlocal as reviews. And I think there are a lot more things are being platform, converted these days. Yes. Something as a service, right? You name it. And these days they've got something as a service. So where do you think the boundaries are going to be in the future? Like when you decide, okay, we could review that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us, we are a B2B platform. And so back to, who is coming to the site, it's the B2B buyer. And so we want to make sure we stay focused on the B2B buyer. In terms of the edges, we're starting to move into services. I think services, for any of us who have, and I'm one of those, been in software as a service or just plain services, oftentimes services for software, it is ripe for more validation. I would have loved, as I was hiring my agencies, like, could I have had a place to understand from others how their experiences were? And so we do have services on G2 today. And that is an area where we see opportunity to expand in the future, particularly around, companies who help you get set up on software, integrate software. That's a natural extension, but I think it'll go beyond that. We also have marketing services companies on G2 today. I was talking to one recently who's seeing more traction within G2, traffic to their profile, et cetera. So I think that'll be a natural place to extend. So for us, I think you're right. The definition of software is only growing, and sort of related categories for us, the B2B focus is going to continue to be core.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing your vision for where you are now versus where you're going. I'm going to continue to be excited to watch G2 evolve over the next 6 months to a year. and beyond. So looking forward to see what you do with it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.